Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I always start these sessions with lots of joy, and it's wonderful to have a very, very international group of peers and social work researchers and practitioners from different parts of the UK and from across the world. Welcome to Editor's Choice Papers video interview with the authors, and it's a wonderful group of papers that we have which have been selected to be Editor's Choice Papers in the forthcoming British Journal of Social Work issue 52/7. I'll introduce the authors in alphabetical order. So first we have Dan Allen, apologies, from Liverpool Hope University, and Victoria Hamnet from Rochdale Borough Council. Their paper's title is Gypsy, Roma and Traveller Children in Child Welfare Services in England. Then we have Ella Kuskov, who is representing a group of authors, namely Cameron Parcel, Stephanie Page, Christina Blaza, and Francisco Perales. Their paper's title is Willing but Unable: How Resources Help Low-Income Mothers Care for Their Children and Minimize Child Protection Interventions. And last but not least, we have David Westlake from Cascade Research Centre at Cardiff University, Cardiff, representing a group of colleagues, Cindy Corliss, Sarah Thompson, Melissa Mandel, Clive Diaz, Ria Talwar, and Louise Folks. Everyone apart from Louise works at Cascade Centre with David. The other colleague, Louise, works at the School of Natural and Social Sciences at University of Gloucestershire. The name of their paper is Devolved Budgets in Children's Social Care, a logic model based on 3 pilot evaluations. They might seem quite diverse topics, a group of colleagues, but also topics that were explored through these studies. And I will ask authors now in reverse order to introduce and say a bit more about studies, and then we will discuss what is the connective tissue between these 3 papers. So Dave, would you like to tell us a bit more about what the study was about, who funded it, and what methodologies you used, and the key findings?
Sure. Yeah. So the study came about. It was a bit unusual actually, because the research centre I work at, Cascade, at Cardiff, was the research partner for the setup period for the What Works Centre for Children's Social Care, which is a relatively new What Works Centre in England. So our role was for the first 2 years to do lots of research and work with them on developing evidence standards and other things like that. So this is one of the studies that was commissioned as part of that process. The study's called Devolved Budgets. The kind of rationale is that many families who work with children's social care have financial difficulties, don't have enough money, living in poverty and so on. But social workers are fairly limited in what they can do to help. So typically, they might be able to get small amounts of money, but usually it's quite hard won. So they have to go through lots of hurdles of sort of bureaucracy, managers and resource panels and so on to access that money. So the idea of the project was to test an intervention whereby they could access larger amounts of money, and they had the sort of autonomy to decide how it was to be spent with families, in collaboration with families. So we worked with 3 local authorities, and they all did it slightly differently, but the basic premise was the same. In 2 of them, they had a limit of £4,000 per family. In the 3rd, they had a higher limit of 10,000. And the idea was that the decision-making process was devolved. So it didn't really involve managers too much. For the higher amounts, I think they did have to go through a sort of light touch, like application process to access the money. But the idea was that social workers could get this money quickly and they could spend it on things that families needed. And it was a feasibility study to really see how that worked and explore the kind of what happened when you did that, and to sort of see how the money was spent, how much of it was spent, what kinds of uses they came up with, and also what kind of impact it had for families. So we did the study over the course of about a year. The starting point was, because it was a theory-based evaluation, it's primarily qualitative. We started with a logic model, which was basically us working with the sort of developers of the program, the practitioners and the managers in the 3 authorities to figure out how it was sort of expected to work. and understand what kind of mechanisms through which the people involved thought it could have an impact. And then the rest of the study was to collecting data to explore those things and see whether there was evidence to support those assumptions. So we did a series of rounds of data collection. It was a kind of iterative process. So we collect data, then go back and kind of consider how it fitted in with the logic model, you know, what it supported, what things were kind of contradicted, and so on. We collected data mainly through interviews and focus groups, both with professionals, practitioners, managers, and also with families. So we spoke to a small number of parents and young people who were recipients of the budgets. And the kind of the sort of product of the study was a more refined logic model that was designed to be used in future if something like this was going to be scaled up. So we kind of refined those mechanisms, tweaked it, revised it, and we came up with two kind of key pathways through which these devolved budgets were thought to operate. The first was that money was spent on families' felt and assessed needs, so the things they felt they needed, so material provisions primarily, but also in some cases it was used for things like therapeutic support. So there are generally long waiting lists for things like CAMS, child and adolescent mental health provision. So in some cases, the money was used to sort of speed that process up. It was also used to buy kind of things that families needed. So in one case, well, in lots of cases actually, there were things like clothing for children, some sort of house renovations to make living conditions better. In one case, there was someone's car broke down. They needed it to get the child to appointments. They bought a second-hand car. So a very wide range of uses for the money. The second pathway was generally smaller amounts of money that was used to help social workers build relationships with families and young people. So they might spend 20 quid here or there, go for lunch, go for a coffee, and have that time to sort of talk about how things were going and build a relationship. So quite a diverse set of ways that money was used. A few other striking things that we found. One was that the social workers were generally quite cautious about spending. There was a concern at the start that social workers might kind of blow the budget very quickly, spend on inappropriate things. That didn't happen. It was almost the opposite. They were quite cautious. They actually spent less than expected. The rates and the amount of spending was much lower than anticipated, and there was an underspend. So that's interesting. And we concluded that actually that's kind of a reflection of the way that social workers has become. Social workers are kind of, they're not particularly supported to make those decisions. There's a lot of bureaucracy, and we felt that actually a lot of local authorities, even without this sort of this intervention, they could free social workers up to have more autonomy to spend small amounts of money, and that we felt that would be helpful. I was going to say something else, but I've forgotten now.
We can come back to it.
Yeah, it might come back to me, but those were the kind of the main thrust of the findings. Yeah, and it was a really interesting project.
Thank you so much. Thank you also for summarizing it so well and so richly. Ella, your work was similar only as far as it also focused on a particular new innovation in service. So do you want to tell us a bit more about the work you and your colleagues did?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think very similar to Dave, our work kind of started from this knowledge that, you know, a lot of the families who are engaged in child protection interventions are living in poverty, do have their low income, have a lot of financial issues. And so, as well as, I'm not sure the context over there, but in Australia, in the child protection system, we have this idea of children need to have a parent who is willing and able to protect them from harm. And that's kind of the key to being able to keep your child with you. And so we kind of took the approach that, you know, well, how do we separate willing and able? Like if a parent is willing, but unable because of, structural barriers, income. How do we then, support the parent to actually be able to be the parent that they want to be? And so at the beginning of COVID, beginning of 2020, the Queensland government actually funded a 1-year pilot program that really kind of recognised the, the resource kind of side of things for low-income families. And this pilot was really targeted at families with very low income who are at risk of homelessness and also at risk of having child safety intervention because of that homelessness. So the program provided supportive housing, so subsidised housing at 25% of family income, as well as a range of different supports just to help the families, access what they needed. So our research did an evaluation of the pilot program, and so the evaluation itself was mixed methods, but this particular paper only reported on the qualitative side of things. So we did interviews with the families who were involved in the program. Now, all of the parents we spoke to happened to be mothers. I think there were 2 or 3 families where it was a dual parent family, but the fathers opted not to be involved. So it is very focused on the mothers. We also interviewed child safety officers, which are, the government employed social workers who have the responsibility of supporting families to ideally keep the children or making the decision to remove the children from the family if need be. And we also interviewed the service practitioners who are delivering the program itself, finding the housing, delivering the services, all that jazz. And so what we really found was that the mothers were really kind of struggling with this, the tension between, they were all, very, very loving, very caring parents. Every decision they made was based around what is going to be best for my child. So it was very clear, particularly around domestic violence issues. Some mothers chose to stay with their violent partners, others chose to leave, others chose to call child protection and get them involved themselves. But no matter what the decision was, all of the thought process that went into it was, what is going to keep my child the safest? So often, we come in from this idea that, the parents might not be particularly responsible or caring, but that is, not at all what we found. Everything they were trying to do was care for their kid with the resources that they had. And so what we found was once they'd been in the program for about 8 months, there was a radical shift in, the way they were talking about their ability to parent. So we started seeing things like, my kid has their own bed now. I feel safe and secure for the first time ever because I've got a house. I'm not sleeping on some random's couch. I can get my kids to school. They're going to daycare. We have a permanent address. So my teenagers have a school catchment area so they can go to school, which they couldn't do before. So just all of these little things that I can look for a job now, right? So so many things that just this stability and the safety, and then linking into legal services and for domestic violence orders, we call them here, but protection orders for past abuse and all that sort of thing. So just the way that the mothers were able to engage with the program to really live up to their parenting aspirations and give their children everything that they'd wanted to give them, but couldn't because of all of these kind of structural barriers that the system would often reinforce. Did I cover all the points?
I think so. That's thank you so much, because
Okay,
it
thank
provides a good
you.
overview of the overall work. But it opens up what I don't know about people who are watching this, but for me, it kind of draws a lot of questions. But before we kind of open it for a joint discussion, last but not least, Dan and Victoria, do you want to say some bit more about your work, which was slightly different, certainly in terms of how you engage with available data and what it explored in terms of focus? So could you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, definitely. We've been looking at the representation of Gypsy Roma traveller children in care, which has sort of been my professional social work practice and research career. But the quantitative advancement of this topic was owed to Victoria and her amazing MA social work dissertation. So, Victoria, do you want to give us an overview of your?
Yeah, absolutely. So I completed my master's in 2020. And as part of that was to submit a dissertation. The dissertation was around Gypsy, Roma and traveller children, and to get a real understanding as to whether there was a disproportionate and uneven focus on those children being referred into social work, into children's social care, sorry. And on the back of that was to understand what training and practice could be implemented to support or reduce those numbers should that be evident. To be able to do that, I requested some information from the Department for Education through the Freedom of Information Act, and was able to analyse that data to be able to get us to the point where we're at now, and that kind of fed into the paper that myself and Dan then wrote, essentially.
Yeah, brilliant. So Victoria's dissertation was very much about the descriptive statistics in terms of looking at trends of numbers of children being referred into child welfare services, all the way through the process into the number of children then who became looked after. What we did then in working that methodological approach up was we applied various different quantitative elements, but specifically per capita representation, looking for disparity ratios consistent with past on regression methods. And what we found by then, one of the biggest challenges that we had was getting a point of comparison, because across all of Europe, and indeed those places where there were concerns about Gypsy Roma traveller communities' involvement and overrepresentation, there's a lack of information about population sizes. So it was difficult for us to consider the number of children then being referred into child welfare services and their experiences and journey through various systems without that firm confidence of population. So we used the, as Victoria said, data from the Department of Education that codes ethnicity as travellers of Irish heritage, but it conflates Gypsy and Roma together. So Gypsy and Roma communities are completely different ethnic groups, but for the Department of Education, they put them together. So to look at a comparative population sample, we stuck with the Department of Education school population records and use that as the basis for the per capita population analysis. What that showed is that there was a significant number of Irish travellers and Gypsy Roma children being referred in at a disproportionate rate. 1 in 5 Irish travellers being referred into child welfare services, 1 in 10 Gypsy Roma, compared to 1 in 15 of all other ethnic minority groups. And we used the Hood's filter and funnel method to show how over time then the significant peak in numbers of those children being referred into the system followed that trend through to looked after numbers too. In 2018, Gypsy Roma traveller children were 3 times more likely to be taken into state care than any other ethnic minority group. But by analysing then the statistical representation for Irish travellers and Gypsy Roma, it wasn't ideal, but that we were working with the data that we were given in terms of the conflation of ethnicity, is that we can see that over time the intervention for Irish travellers reduced. So a high number of those children being referred into child welfare services, but over time the number of children then going into initial case conferences, child protection conferences, and then into state care reduced. That showed us then that if we could reduce the number of children being referred into child welfare services in the first instance to reduce that number so there was parity with all other ethnic groups, we could sort of begin to start to think about how we could address disproportionate representation. Where there was a decrease then in the rates of intervention over time for Irish travellers, the opposite was true for Gypsy Roma, where we saw an increase in intervention over time. And that's the first time, certainly in my understanding of any research, where we started to understand how child welfare services impact and influence communities differently, because often Gypsy Roma travellers are homogenised into one group, a bit like DME or LGBT. It's not useful, and people often who are considered to be included in those terms don't necessarily agree with them or feel that they identify with them. So the opposite being true for Gypsy Roma travellers, we're able to start thinking about what happens in child protection practice, what happens in terms of managing stigma, shame, risk, and they're the sorts of trajectories that we can look at. So because of Victoria's brilliant MA dissertation, we're able to scale that up in terms of the methodological approaches that we've used in this paper to try and then demonstrate an advancement of quantitative research, but also an advancement of our understanding of this really important topic too.
It's amazing, and the link between your work, Victoria, during your MA, and how that linked and impacted the future collaboration with Dan is just wonderful to hear and showcase also through the journal. One of the things that kind of we all agreed is that if you read all the 3 papers, and I really encourage you to do so, they're now open access and available on via the British Journal of Social Work, is that structural and systemic obstacles faced by both people who use social care services and social workers alike, and inequalities kind of are threaded through all 3 papers, although they are very different in focus, in location, and in approach, particularly because we are kind of starting to engage more with understanding the data available to us, but Dan and Victoria's work really showcases how important that is, as well as to look at interventions which are being developed and understanding them from different perspectives, as evident in Ella's and A-works and that of their colleagues. So what are the notes that you have all kind of, and themes that you have noticed threaded across the 3 papers, and in relation to your broader work on your within the focus on child and family social work? Let's open to all of this, don't be shy.
For me, then, it's the advancement of clear opportunities to say with more concrete confidence, if you like, what is the current situation, what needs to change. And in the business of social work value, social work ethics, what makes social work research distinctive? I think all these papers demonstrate that distinctive nature really well. There's a clear issue, but there's an equal opportunity for us to think about systematic change and use those levers within this research to achieve that. So for me, the demonstrative impact of the uniqueness of social work research and related research is really important.
Also, Dave, do you mind saying a bit more, particularly how was the information around decision making for social workers, which you mentioned, that they were very cautious? How was that received, and what has there been any follow-up to the work in terms of how we understand that caution and how it might influence future work?
Yeah, I think that was one of the most interesting things for me, that I suppose it's the interaction between the kind of system level stuff that we were just talking about and the kind of individual level. And I think, people were very surprised that social workers were in many cases reluctant to spend the money, and certainly we found over the course of the period of the project, there was it was kind of a journey for lots of social workers to build their confidence to kind of use the money and make those decisions and work with families. And they were just it was so alien to them to kind of have this large amount of money that they could spend, that I think they felt uncomfortable in many cases. And there was a small number of workers who felt that some families didn't deserve the financial support for various reasons. They maybe have been working with them for a long time and they'd kind of had a difficult relationship. They felt that other families who were maybe not part of this cohort deserved the money more or make better use of it. So I think lots of considerations for social workers to make those decisions. And I think reluctance to spend was, I think, an illustration of how the system kind of operates, and how, you know, they're so used to having to request authorization from a different part of the system that's further away from families. I think one of the comments we made in the paper was that often these big decisions about finances and resources and kind of more sort of expensive support for families is made by resource panels and, you know, people, senior managers who know less about the individual family circumstances. So the point of this project was to try and get that decision making closer to families, and it was, yeah, successful in many ways, but we did have this barrier that yeah, I think we probably all recognise.
Absolutely, and
So
I really hope
so
that. Sorry.
I know, I was just going to say, like, similarly, this idea of, like, yeah, decision making and getting it back as close to the families as possible was a big thing in ours as well, in that, you know, the dignity that came with choice. And I think you had an example, Dave, of someone going to IKEA with their social worker, and they got to choose their own furniture without just being told, this is what we have, you've got to take it. And so this idea, I know what's going to suit my family. I know what I need in a house or in furniture or in food vouchers, or what, like, I know what I need. Can you please just trust me to make the right decisions with the resources, rather than you deciding what's best for my family? So that was a big thing for ours as well.
I think trust is a really important thing, because it's kind of, you can see trust working throughout the whole system. So it's we could kind of identify that with social workers trusting families with, you know, with this resource, and to kind of use the finances in a way that's going to help their children. And then you've got kind of the senior managers in the system trusting social workers to make decisions. And actually, at first, certainly, although I think so the managers at first were quite nervous about kind of, you know, letting go of that control and saying to social workers, you decide, because obviously they're used to making lots of decisions about these things. And I think we interviewed them towards the end of the study, and many of them said that, you know, over time it became more, that they became more comfortable with that. But at first it was quite a different way of working, saying it's your decision, rather than kind of having control of that. And I think that operates throughout the system, really.
Elliot, what's happening now with the program that you focused on in your work?
Well, it's
very glad you asked.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, was that Dave or Ella?
For yourself.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So since the evaluation, it was originally funded for 1 year. It's since been extended for 4 years, and we've actually just gotten funding to do another evaluation. So they're now 2 years in, and we're just, we're doing the plans now to start talking to the families again, seeing what's changed over 2 years, hoping that it's still been just as good and that we're seeing the benefits carry through. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what's been going on.
Wonderful. We look forward to that study, and hopefully it will also be in British Journal of Social Work. Dave, Dan, sorry, apologies. Dan and Victoria, did you present your findings to any of the local authorities? And if yes, what was the response, and what was the insight from practitioners and managers into the data?
We haven't presented it to any local authorities yet, but we did present it to the House of Lords Levelling Up Committee to start to think about how they could develop data quality, but also the provision of early help services, and that any levelling up, we argued any levelling up initiative that didn't include this specific topic and the important nature of this proven now disproportionate representation would continue to fail these most vulnerable communities. Associated that to, the implementation of the Police Crime and Sentencing Act. So we were looking with the police and the Police Training College to use this research to inform the welfare inquiries that they must take now before evicting, criminalising or confiscating the vehicles of those people living on unauthorised encampments, raising awareness of the the lack of choice and the use of state violence in the control of people who are living on unauthorised entitlements because there's nowhere else for them to live.
That is amazing. And what a wonderful example how work from MA dissertations can be scaled up and impact how we understand people that we work with, and really important to focus in understanding who are the people who we work with and do they experience any further injustice and discrimination within the services because of who they are.
Yeah,
so thank you both.
I think it was really important for Victoria to come and present to the House of Lords as well. Unfortunately, because of COVID, it was facilitated online. Otherwise, I think that would have made a wonderful day.
Yeah. Well, I really hope that the work will progress and that you continue to really emphasise and bring that those findings to many audiences. Dave, what's happening now with the work on direct payments and its use?
Yeah, so I think because of the nature of it, it was obviously funded by a grant from the What Works Centre, which was sort of time limited. So I think the authorities obviously stopped at the end of the project. But they were, I don't actually know what they're doing now, but they were, I think, encouraged by the findings about using the money they did have in their kind of Section 17 budget or whatever to give social workers more autonomy. And I think like I said, in some cases it doesn't take much money. It's a small amount here to go and spend some time with a young person or a family, have lunch with them, have a coffee or whatever. So there were certainly discussions towards the end of the project about how they could do that within their own sort of their existing budgets and so on. But I don't know what's happened. It would be good to sort of follow up and see. And more generally, I think it would be one of our kind of recommendations was that it seemed like a thing that was promising, and it would be worth trying it on a larger scale, perhaps with some sort of tweaks. So maybe with some more, it was very open in terms of what the purpose was, and kind of what money can be spent on. I think maybe some more kind of clearly defined parameters might be worth a try. So I think there's scope to try it more broadly. Obviously that needs funding and stuff, and it's always tricky, but yeah, that would be good to try in future, I think.
Absolutely. And to ask you first, what are you working on now?
Well, I'm involved in various things. I'm just coming to the end of a large randomized trial of a school-based social work intervention. I say the end of the main period of the study. So we've got a report coming out early next year. So we've been working with about 300 schools in England. Half of them have had a social worker based in the school, and we're looking at the impact that has on involvement with child protection, children's services, and also some educational outcomes. So that's been taking up a lot of my time. It's another really interesting study, and yeah, various other projects. We keep ourselves busy at Cascade. There's always new things to do.
Yeah. It's good to hear about it as well. Ella, what are you working on at the moment?
So as well as the follow-up evaluation, we are focusing a lot on the domestic violence side of things, because one of the big things that did come out of the first evaluation was that as much as the program, tried to, mitigate some of the risks involved in domestic violence. They added security features to houses, got the interventions involved, but it was never able to, fully mitigate the risk, because the risk always kind of lies with the perpetrator, who is usually the father. And, there was little that, the child safety system could do to do that. And all of the responsibility was placed on the mothers to manage that violence, and very little engagement with the fathers. So moving forward, we're really kind of interested in how the program or the system itself can kind of rethink how we respond to domestic violence, and to make it safer for the mothers and the children, and kind of take that burden of managing the violence away from the mothers and the victims, and kind of place it where it belongs.
Thank you. Last but not least, Victoria, where you work? You're still in the council?
Yes, I'm still a practicing social worker. there's always potential for a PhD in the near future.
Wonderful.
That's gleaming there.
All social work academics love hearing that about their students.
Yeah.
Excellent. Dan, what are you working on at the moment?
The uncovering the stark and concerning statistics in England has been important because it helps us move the argument on. We now need to look at what's going on in Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland, and establish the reasons for referrals, because any recommendations for early help and preventative services must match the need. So a lot of work is going into that. Our significant concerns working with the Gypsy Roma Traveller Social Work Association, highlighting the potential devastating effect that the police crime sentencing and court is going to have, potentially bringing more children to the attention of child welfare services. So working with the police and other designated authorities to understand and develop good practice to support the work that they do, to make sure that we understand any exacerbation of risk is being caused by police action rather than any reason associated to parental capacity per se. So that work will continue to make sure that police officers and those attending unauthorised encampments are able to understand risk and measure welfare, so that we don't see further disproportionate. So it doesn't increase the number of children being referred into child welfare services, and then increase the number of children who become looked after.
Thank you so much. It's absolutely most wonderful part of working on this journal is to bring to kind of what broader audiences work, which focuses on explaining the experiences of people who use services and social workers alike, and to really signpost some of the challenges and what happens when we provide sufficient resources and support people to have agency, again, service users and social workers alike, to work in partnership in order to address issues that people face. And a hugely important aspect of understanding what are the experiences of particularly marginalized oppressed groups such as Gypsy, Roma and Traveller and Irish Traveller communities. Thank you all so much. It's absolutely wonderful talking to you. Please do spend time reading the articles, because they will bring all this rich, wonderful findings to life, and the new knowledge that we have about our practice. Thank you all so much for being with us, and enjoy reading the issue 52.7.